Subscribe to Dr. Nightmare Channel now.
Story 1. The Basement Door. When I was 12 years old, my family moved into an old two-story house in the quiet outskirts of Marion, Illinois. It wasn't the kind of house that screamed haunted. No dark history, no tragic events, just an aging home that smelled of dust and pine. At least that's what the realtor told us. The house had creaky floors, narrow staircases, and a huge basement that my dad planned to use for storage. The basement was what stuck in my mind. It was deeper than most, with stone walls instead of concrete, and a strange, heavy wooden door that led into a smaller back room. Dad said it used to be a coal room, but even as a kid, something about that door made me uneasy. It didn't fit right. It looked older than the rest of the house, heavy, blackened around the hinges, with a thick metal latch instead of a doorknob. The day we moved in, I remember seeing it slightly open, as if someone had left it that way. I pushed it shut, hearing the echo of wood against stone, and promised myself I'd never go near it again. About a week later, my cousin Brandon came over for the weekend. He was a year older than me, always loud, fearless, and full of bad ideas. We were bored, no TV yet, no internet, nothing to do but wander around the new house. It was raining outside, so we stayed in, exploring every room like it was a maze. At some point, Brandon grinned and said, "Let's play hide and seek." I said no immediately. The house was still half unpacked, full of boxes and shadows, but he wouldn't let it go. He said, "Come on, it'll be fun. I bet you can't find me." I agreed, mostly to shut him up. He turned off the lights on the first floor, laughing as he counted. I ran upstairs, heart pounding from excitement more than fear. The first few rounds were harmless. We hid behind doors, under blankets, in the hall closet. But after the fourth game, Brandon said, "Let's make it harder. You can hide anywhere, even the basement." I froze. The thought of being down there, in the dark, near that heavy door, made my skin crawl. He saw my hesitation and smirked. "What, you scared?" I wanted to say no, but I didn't want to look like a coward either. So I nodded and said, "Fine, basement's fair game." He covered his eyes and started counting. I ran upstairs, heart pounding from excitement more than fear. The first few rounds were harmless. We hid behind doors, under blankets, in the hall closet. But after the fourth game, Brandon said, "Let's make it harder. You can hide anywhere, even the basement." I froze. The thought of being down there, in the dark, near that heavy door, made my skin crawl. He saw my hesitation and smirked. "What, you scared?" I wanted to say no, but I didn't want to look like a coward either. So I nodded and said, "Fine, basement's fair game." He covered his eyes and started counting. I ran upstairs, heart pounding from excitement more than fear. The first few rounds were harmless. We hid behind doors, under blankets, in the hall closet. But after the fourth game, Brandon said, "Let's make it harder. You can hide anywhere, even the basement." I froze. The thought of being down there, in the dark, near that heavy door, made my skin crawl. He saw my hesitation and smirked. "What, you scared?" I wanted to say no, but I didn't want to look like a coward either. So I nodded and said, "Fine, basement's fair game." He covered his eyes and started counting. I ran upstairs, heart pounding from excitement more than fear. The first few rounds were harmless. We hid behind doors, under blankets, in the hall closet. But after the fourth game, Brandon said, "Let's make it harder. You can hide anywhere, even the basement." I froze. The thought of being down there, in the dark, near that heavy door, made my skin crawl. He saw my hesitation and smirked. "What, you scared?" I wanted to say no, but I didn't want to look like a coward either. So I nodded and said, "Fine, basement's fair game." He covered his eyes and started counting. I ran upstairs, heart pounding from excitement more than fear. The first few rounds were harmless. We hid behind doors, under blankets, in the hall closet. But after the fourth game, Brandon said, "Let's make it harder. You can hide anywhere, even the basement." I froze. The thought of being down there, in the dark, near that heavy door, made my skin crawl. He saw my hesitation and smirked. "What, you scared?" I wanted to say no, but I didn't want to look like a coward either. So I nodded and said, "Fine, basement's fair game." He covered his eyes and started counting. I ran upstairs, heart pounding from excitement more than fear. The first few rounds were harmless. We hid behind doors, under blankets, in the hall closet. But after the fourth game, Brandon said, "Let's make it harder. You can hide anywhere, even the basement." I froze. The thought of being down there, in the dark, near that heavy door, made my skin crawl. He saw my hesitation and smirked. "What, you scared?" I wanted to say no, but I didn't want to look like a coward either. So I nodded and said, "Fine, basement's fair game." He covered his eyes and started counting. I ran upstairs, heart pounding from excitement more than fear. The first few rounds were harmless. We hid behind doors, under blankets, in the hall closet. But after the fourth game, Brandon said, "Let's make it harder. You can hide anywhere, even the basement." I froze. The thought of being down there, in the dark, near that heavy door, made my skin crawl. He saw my hesitation and smirked. "What, you scared?" I wanted to say no, but I didn't want to look like a coward either. So I nodded and said, "Fine, basement's fair game." He covered his eyes and started counting. I ran upstairs, heart pounding from excitement more than fear. The first few rounds were harmless. We hid behind doors, under blankets, in the hall closet. But after the fourth game, Brandon said, "Let's make it harder. You can hide anywhere, even the basement." I froze. The thought of being down there, in the dark, near that heavy door, made my skin crawl. He saw my hesitation and smirked. "What, you scared?" I wanted to say no, but I didn't want to look like a coward either. So I nodded and said, "Fine, basement's fair game." He covered his eyes and started counting. I ran upstairs, heart pounding from excitement more than fear. The first few rounds were harmless. We hid behind doors, under blankets, in the hall closet. But after the fourth game, Brandon said, "Let's make it harder. You can hide anywhere, even the basement." I froze. The thought of being down there, in the dark, near that heavy door, made my skin crawl. He saw my hesitation and smirked. "What, you scared?" I wanted to say no, but I didn't want to look like a coward either. So I nodded and said, "Fine, basement's fair game." He covered his eyes and started counting. I ran upstairs, heart pounding from excitement more than fear. The first few rounds were harmless. We hid behind doors, under blankets, in the hall closet. But after the fourth game, Brandon said, "Let's make it harder. You can hide anywhere, even the basement." I froze. The thought of being down there, in the dark, near that heavy door, made my skin crawl. He saw my hesitation and smirked. "What, you scared?" I wanted to say no, but I didn't want to look like a coward either. So I nodded and said, "Fine, basement's fair game." He covered his eyes and started counting. I ran upstairs, heart pounding from excitement more than fear. The first few rounds were harmless. We hid behind doors, under blankets, in the hall closet. But after the fourth game, Brandon said, "Let's make it harder. You can hide anywhere, even the basement. I froze. The thought of being down there, in the dark, near that heavy door, made my skin crawl. He saw my hesitation and smirked. "What, you scared?" I wanted to say no, but I didn't want to look like a coward either. So I nodded and said, "Fine, basement's fair game." He covered his eyes and started counting. I ran upstairs, heart pounding from excitement more than fear. The first few rounds were harmless. We hid behind doors, under blankets, in the hall closet. But after the fourth game, Brandon said, "Let's make it harder. You can hide anywhere, even the basement." I froze. The thought of being down there, in the dark, near that heavy door, made my skin crawl. He saw my hesitation and smirked. "What, you scared?" I wanted to say no, but I didn't want to look like a coward either. So I nodded and said, "Fine, basement's fair game." He covered his eyes and started
counting. I went down the basement stairs, one creaking step at a time, the air growing colder with each step. The single bulb hanging from the ceiling buzzed faintly. Shadows stretched across the stone walls like long fingers. I looked around, trying to find a hiding spot that wasn't near that blackened door. There were boxes, an old couch, some tools, but no good places. The air smelled like damp concrete and something metallic. And then I heard it. A sound from behind the door. A soft, scraping noise, slow, deliberate, like something dragging against the stone floor. I froze. It could have been a mouse or the house settling. That's what I told myself. But the sound came again. Louder this time. Closer. I slowly backed up, heart hammering in my chest. I wanted to run upstairs, but I didn't want Brandon to think I chickened out. Then I noticed something. The latch on the door. It wasn't locked anymore. It hung slightly loose. The door opened just a crack. "Brandon," I whispered. No answer. Maybe he'd snuck down here trying to scare me. I took a few steps toward the door, squinting through the dim light. Something shifted in the darkness beyond the crack. A shape. Low to the ground. Hunched. Pale. "Brandon, stop messing around," I said louder. Then the door slammed shut. I jumped, stumbling backward. The sound echoed through the basement, followed by silence. Every instinct in my body told me to run, so I did. I sprinted up the stairs and burst into the kitchen, gasping. Brandon was standing there, holding a soda. "What's wrong with you?" I stammered. You were just down there." He frowned. "No, I was waiting for you to come back up. I thought you gave up." I didn't believe him. I grabbed his arm and dragged him downstairs. But when we got there, the basement looked exactly the same. Door shut tight, latch locked. He laughed nervously. "You're freaking yourself out." But I saw it. The wet footprints leading from the door to the bottom of the stairs. Bare footprints. Small, like a child's. That night, I couldn't sleep. Every time the floor creaked, I thought I heard the latch on that door moving. The next morning, Dad went down to the basement to store some boxes. When he came back up, he looked pale. He said, "I could have sworn I heard someone whispering down there." Mom told him he was imagining things. But after that, he nailed the basement door shut. A few months passed. Winter came, the snow piled high, and life returned to normal. One night in January, the power went out during a storm. We lit candles and played cards in the living room. Brandon wasn't there this time, just me, Mom, and Dad. Around 10 p.m., we heard it again from the basement. 3 knocks, slow, heavy, from behind the door that was supposed to be sealed. Dad grabbed a flashlight and went down to check. I begged him not to, but he said it was probably pipes or tree roots shifting in the ground. We waited. The light flickered at the bottom of the stairs. Then Dad screamed. Mom and I ran down after him, only to find him standing there, frozen, the flashlight shaking in his hand. The boards over the basement door were gone. The door itself hung open, swinging slightly, revealing nothing but blackness beyond. And the floor, the stone floor, was covered in wet footprints again. Dad wanted to call the police, but there was no sign of anyone breaking in. He tried to board it back up, but no matter how many nails he hammered, the boards wouldn't stay. By spring, we sold the house. We never told the new owners about the basement. Years later, when I was in college, I decided to look up the property history. Turns out the house had been built in 1921 by a man named Howard McAllister. He lived there with his wife and daughter until one winter night in 1933 when the little girl went missing. They searched everywhere, the woods, the lake, the nearby farms, but they never found her. When police questioned the parents, they claimed she used to play hide and seek in the basement. That's where she liked to hide. They said one day they couldn't find her anymore. No one ever opened that door again. I never went back to Marion, but sometimes when I stay somewhere old, a motel, a cabin, an old house, I still catch that smell. Damp stone and iron. And at night, when everything is quiet, I swear I hear it again. 3 soft knocks from below the floorboards, like someone's still waiting to be found.
Story 2. The Last Round. I used to work as a camp counselor when I was 19, a kind of summer job that felt more like an escape from home than actual work. The place was called Camp Alderwood, tucked deep in the forests of northern Pennsylvania. It was quiet, isolated, and surrounded by endless rows of tall pine trees that seemed to whisper when the wind moved through them. By the time Thanksgiving rolled around, camp had long been shut down for the season. But that year, the owners invited a few of us back to help with a charity event, a Thanksgiving weekend retreat for families who couldn't afford to travel. It sounded wholesome enough. We'd cook, organize games for the kids, and keep the cabins warm. I figured it was an easy way to make some cash before the winter holidays. There were 6 of us counselors in total, plus about 15 guests staying across 3 cabins. The days were uneventful. Cooking, cleanup, hiking trips, and laughter echoing through the woods. But the nights were strange. You could hear things out there. Not animals, not wind. Something that sounded almost like breathing between the trees. On the second night, one of the kids, a boy named Eli, maybe 9 or 10, suggested we all play hide and seek after dinner. His mom laughed and told him it was too dark, but he insisted. "It'll be fun," he said. "We can use flashlights." The idea spread fast, and soon all the kids wanted in. The parents were exhausted from cooking, so they told us counselors to supervise. I remember the exact moment I agreed. I wish I hadn't. We decided to play near the old mess hall, a big wooden building with a wide field out front and a line of dense trees wrapping around the sides. We set some rules: no going past the tree line, no hiding inside buildings, and I volunteered to be the seeker for the first round. The kids laughed, running off in every direction, flashlights flickering like fireflies in the dark. The air was freezing, and every breath came out in clouds. I counted to 50. When I opened my eyes, the forest looked alive, patches of light moving between the trunks, shadows darting back and forth. "Ready or not, here I come," I called out. The first few were easy. 2 kids hiding behind the woodpile, one behind a canoe rack. But after 10 minutes, I realized Eli was missing. "Okay, Eli, game's over," I shouted. No answer. The others started helping me look. We checked behind the cabins, the dock, even the mess hall porch. Nothing. Then I noticed something. A flashlight lying at the edge of the trees, still on, pointing straight into the forest. I picked it up, shining it ahead. The beam cut through the fog, revealing a narrow animal trail leading deeper into the woods. "Eli?" A soft laugh echoed from somewhere ahead. I exhaled in relief. Kids loved pranks, and stepped onto the path. The others stayed behind, waiting near the field. I told them I'd grab him and be right back. The deeper I went, the quieter it got. The only sound was snow crunching under my boots. The light pounced off the trees, catching the fog like smoke. "All right, game's over," I said. "You win. Come on out." Something moved ahead, quick, low to the ground. "Eli?" No response. I walked faster, shining the light left and right. That's when I saw another flashlight lying on the ground, this one flickering. That didn't make sense. He only had one. Then I heard it again. That same breathy laugh, closer now, behind me. I spun around, but there was nothing. Only the fog, thick and silent. At this point, I was trying not to panic. I kept calling his name, my voice echoing through the trees. Then I saw movement, about 20 feet ahead, behind a cluster of pines. A small figure, crouched low, facing away from me. It looked like a kid wearing a hoodie. "Eli," I said, relief flooding through me. "You scared me, man. Let's go back." The figure didn't move. I took a few steps forward. "Hey, it's getting cold, buddy." The flashlight flickered. The figure slowly turned its head. What I saw wasn't a kid. The face was wrong. Pale gray skin stretched tight, eyes too wide and completely black. The mouth hung open like a puppet's. No sound coming out, but I could see it breathing, short, sharp gasps that made a wet clicking noise. I froze. The light trembled in my hand. Then in one jerky movement, it stood up, tall, impossibly tall for a child, and stepped backwards into the darkness. I ran. Branches whipped my face as I sprinted towards the clearing, heart pounding so hard I thought I'd pass out. I didn't stop until I saw the glow of the mess hall lights ahead. When I stumbled out of the woods, the other counselors and parents rushed towards me. They'd found Eli. He was sitting on the porch, crying, wrapped in a blanket. Apparently, he'd been hiding under the canoe rack the whole time. But when I asked him if he'd been in the woods, he shook his head. He said, "I didn't go there. I heard someone calling my name from the trees." My stomach dropped. "Did it sound like me?" I asked. He nodded. That night, I didn't sleep. Neither did the other counselors. We locked the cabin doors, shut off the lights, and sat in silence listening to the wind. Around 3 a.m., someone knocked on the door. 3 slow, deliberate knocks. We didn't answer. The next morning, the snow outside was untouched, except for a single line of footprints leading from the tree line to our door. They weren't boots. They were bare feet. When the event ended, I left Alderwood and never went back. But about 2 years later, I got a message from one of the old counselors, Dana, who still worked there. She sounded nervous. She said they'd reopened camp for summer and had a new group of kids. Everything was fine, until one of them A boy around 9 went missing during a night game. They found him the next morning, sitting by the lake, shivering. When they asked him where he'd been, he said, "Playing hide and seek with the tall boy." Dana told me she thought it was a coincidence, but she said she found footprints again, bare, long, deep in the mud, leading straight from the woods to the cabins. And near the old mess hall, they found something else, a flashlight, still on, pointing into the trees. I've thought about that night for years. Sometimes I tell myself it was just the darkness, the fog, my imagination playing tricks. But sometimes, when I walk near tree lines or hear laughter echoing from far away, I still get that feeling that someone's hiding just beyond the light, waiting for me to count to 50, waiting for the next round to begin.
Story 3. The Girl in the Wall. When I was 8, I lived in a quiet neighborhood in Somerset, Maine, the kind of place where everyone knew each other, and summer evenings smelled like grass and pine. The houses were old, close together, and each one seemed to have its own secrets. But the one across from ours, the Warren house, was different. It had been empty for years. The windows were covered in grime, the porch sagged, and ivy crawled all the way up to the roof. No one ever went near it, except for us kids when we played in the street. It was our haunted house. We made up stories about it, that someone had died there, that ghosts lived in the attic, that if you looked in the upstairs window after dark, you'd see a girl watching you. Of course, none of it was true. At least, that's what I thought. One summer afternoon, my best friend Liam came over with his cousins. It was hot, we were bored, and as usual, someone suggested hide and seek. We played outside for hours, running between yards, hiding behind trees and fences. But eventually, we got tired of the same spots. That's when Liam looked at the old Warren house and said, "Bet no one's brave enough to hide in there." We all froze. The house was off limits. Our parents had told us never to go near it. But when you're 8 and trying to act tough, warnings don't mean much. I don't know what got into me that day, but I said, "I'll do it." Liam's face lit up. "For real?" I nodded, even though my stomach was already twisting. He grinned. "All right, you hide in there, we'll count out here, but you gotta stay put until we find you." Deal. The back door of the Warren house wasn't locked. It creaked open with a sound that made my skin crawl. The air was stale and cold even though it was midsummer. Dust floated in the sunlight, pouring through cracks in the walls. The floorboards groaned under my feet as I stepped inside. I found myself in the kitchen, everything coated in a thin layer of dirt. Old furniture sat covered in sheets, and spider webs clung to every corner. I could hear the muffled sound of Liam counting outside. 1, 2, 3. I didn't go far. Just past the kitchen was a narrow hallway with peeling wallpaper. I figured I'd hide there, maybe behind a door or under a table, just long enough to prove I wasn't scared. But then I heard it. A faint sound. A giggle. It came from upstairs. I froze. My heart started hammering. It didn't sound like Liam or any of the others. It was high-pitched, soft like a little girl's laugh. I told myself it was just the wind, or maybe an echo from outside. But still, curiosity got the better of me. I started climbing the stairs. Each step creaked, dust falling from the railing as I pulled myself up. When I reached the top, I saw a long hallway with several doors. Most were closed, but one, the one at the end, was open just a few inches. That's where the sound came from again, the same soft laugh. I swallowed hard and whispered, "Hello."
No answer. I stepped closer, the floor creaking under my feet. The door moved slightly, as if from a breeze, but there were no open windows. I pushed it open. The room was small, empty except for an old bed frame and a cracked dresser. The wallpaper had peeled away, exposing faded plaster underneath. For a moment, I thought maybe I'd imagined it all. But then I noticed something strange. One section of the wall, near the bed, looked newer than the rest. The boards were smoother, lighter in color, like someone had repaired it not too long ago. And that's when I heard it again. A whisper. So faint, I almost thought it was my imagination. "Do you want to play?" The voice came from inside the wall. I stumbled back, knocking into the dresser. My whole body went cold. The whisper came again, this time clearer, almost right in my ear. "Let's play hide and seek." I bolted down the stairs, nearly tripping, and ran straight out the back door. Liam and the others were waiting. They laughed when they saw me, calling me a chicken, but I couldn't even speak. I just kept staring at that house. I swore I heard something moving inside, like tiny fingernails scraping wood. I didn't go back there for years, but when I was 16, the town finally decided to tear the Warren house down. It had become unsafe, full of mold and rotting beams. That morning, I stood across the street and watched the demolition crew set up. Liam was there too. We hadn't talked much since middle school, but he nodded at me, remembering. The first hit of the excavator tore through the roof. Dust exploded into the air, and I swear for a moment I heard a faint cry, like a child's voice echoing from the rubble. The workers kept going, and as they broke through the second floor, one of them shouted for the machines to stop. He'd found something. At first, I couldn't see what it was. People started gathering, whispering. But then I heard someone say it, quietly, like they didn't believe it themselves. "It's a body." The news spread fast. They said they found the remains of the young girl, maybe 8 or 9, sealed inside the Warren house. No one knew who she was. There were no missing children from that time, no records, no evidence of foul play. The old owners had moved away decades ago, and no one could track them down. The only detail that really stuck with me was this. The girl had been clutching something in her hand, a small wooden toy, the kind kids used to play with 100 years ago. On it, carved crudely on the surface, were 2 words. "You're it." That night, I couldn't sleep. The sound of her voice kept replaying in my head. "Do you want to play? Let's play hide and seek." I tried to convince myself it had all been in my imagination, that maybe I heard wind, not words. But the next morning, I went to where the house had stood. All that was left was a patch of dirt and a few splinters of wood. And there, lying in the dirt where the wall had been, was something small and wooden. A toy, carved with the same words. I didn't touch it. I just turned and walked home, feeling something cold brush the back of my neck, like a child's hand, soft and light. It's been 15 years since then. I moved far away, started my own family, and tried to forget. But last month, my daughter came running into my room in the middle of the night. She said she had heard something in the walls. When I asked what it was, she said, "A girl's voice." I forced a smile and told her it was just the house settling. But before she went back to bed, she turned to me and said something that made my blood run cold. She told me to tell you, it's your turn to hide.